There we go. We're recording. So just to say, as this is the last in our book group, just to say a big thank you very, very much indeed to our inspirational hosts so far, Emma, Bruce, Richard, Andrew, Sally Ann, and Margit coming up. I'm sure you're going to be inspirational as well. But really thank you for your insights and your perspective and the guidance. I've heard such creative voices and in really inspirational spiritual guidance and leadership and such compassionate listening. And also we've heard from fearless writers as well. All of these skills, of course, you know where I'm going with this, take us back to Julian, don't they? Somebody, a woman, a giant, an absolute giant of her time, and in our time she'd still be a giant, you know, who embodied all of those skills, all of those abilities. And of course, one other thing that she could do, of course, she was an amazing, an inspirational, a brilliant intellectual thinker, which of course, Margit, I'm coming over to you now, darling, with this introduction. So just to say, Dr. Margit Thofner is here today as our host, speaker tonight. And she is someone that I've been lucky enough to know Margit for many years. I mean, she is a friend, a neighbour. I think also, Margit, you were the researcher on Sally Ann's film, although I may have got that bit wrong. But Margit is the senior lecturer in art history at the Open University at the moment. She studied at the Courtauld and has taught at Sussex, at St Andrews, at Bristol, at University of East Anglia, of course, here in Norwich, and now she's at the Open University. And really, her interests are phenomenally impressive and wide-ranging. But I know her work really for her interest in the history of religion, but she's also, you know, researched politics, gender, court politics, art, uh, so much. But she's particularly known, of course, for her work in the early modern period in Northern Europe, in the Netherlands. So all of this takes us bang on back to Julian. But before we get there, of course, just to say that, you know, so Margit is someone who is one of those brilliant intellectual people who can take quite complicated ideas, dissect them, and say them back to you in a way that makes you feel quite clever. When Margit is talking to you, you think you understand it all. 3 minutes later, if you're like me, you know, I'm lost again. But Margit, of course, has the privilege of living in the world we live in now, where her work is informed by other brilliant minds. She has a network of other academics and thinkers she can talk to. She has a library. She has a computer. She doesn't have to remember everything herself because she can, like all of us, file it and put it away. And of course, you know, when we come back to thinking again about Julian, you know, for Julian to, when I reflect about Margit and I come back to Julian, I just think, you know, Julian contemplated the mysteries of existence and faith. And she had nothing to do this with except her mind. She didn't, there wasn't even the printing press, there weren't books. She didn't have other, well, we don't know who came to talk to her, but this idea that it was her keen mind, her faith, her deep reflection, her unwavering belief. And she took all of this and she held it and she reworked it. I mean, it's just to me just another, she never ever fails to just for me to stand in awe of her. I think I'm just in awe of Julian all the time. And so it's in that spirit really that I come back to Margit, who also, like Julian, I think has some of that brilliance with an extraordinary ability to read, retain, analyze, and then give back to us with great clarity her thoughts. So there we go, Margit. I hope I haven't said too much to make you embarrassed, but well, I'm really looking forward to your talk tonight. And over to you.
Well, first, thank you very much. Yes, I am embarrassed. It's your first answer. And
Thought you might
I
be.
doubt very much that I can live up to that wonderful introduction, but thank you for your kindness. It's much appreciated. And I'd also like to say thank you so much for inviting me. I'm very honoured to be here as the last speaker in this really interesting and stimulating cycle of talks we've had. I've learned so much from Emma Pennington's book. I've learned a lot from the conversations I've had with some of you. And it has been a very nourishing environment to be in. I should also do a thing that I think you're probably quite tired of us doing now, which is to remind you that we are a charity, the Friends of Julian, and we are grateful for your contributions because that's what allows us to put these kinds of things on. So thank you from the bottom of our collective hearts for helping us to promote the wonderful woman and thinker and preacher, in fact, that Julian was and still is. So I'm now going to start sharing a presentation with you because I'm an art historian. I tend to think visually, and it helps me to kind of keep my thoughts straight. So let's see if this now works. This is the exciting bit. Can you see that, everyone?
Yes, yep,
Brilliant.
that's working well.
Okay, I will then start. Cool. So this week we're focusing with Emma Pennington on Julian's 15th revelation, which is about patient suffering. I think it's very fitting this should be our central topic today, because we are exactly 1 week from Good Friday, the day when we commemorate Jesus's patient suffering, the agonizingly slow death under the torture, and it was an act of torture. That's a death on the cross under the Roman Empire. And I'm going to get to that question about patient suffering presently, and the question about how Julian teaches us to recognize and engage with patient suffering. But I want to begin my talk today the way Sir Leanne began a couple of weeks ago, by telling you about how I first met Julian. But I have to begin with a confession, because I've told some of you that I thought I first met Julian as an academic, when during my PhD I started to become aware of and began to research the incredible richness and enduring legacy of the medieval mystical tradition. And when I said that, I did genuinely think it was true, but it isn't. I'm sorry to say. From reading Emma Pennington's book and from talking to you, I've realized over the last week or so that I've actually known Julian for much longer. I just didn't know that I did. I've been aware of her world, and especially the rich poetic treasury from which she drew her writings ever since I was a small child. Now, some of you may know this, I grew up in a village in southwestern Denmark, and I simply cannot remember a time when I didn't know how to sing, whether at home or in church. My mother's favourite hymn for Easter, which in English is Hail, Saviour and Redeemer. I still know to this day pretty much all of it off by heart, and I can actually sing it from memory, but I will spare you that particular treat. I keep that for the shower. The whole thing is a poetic evocation of Christ's redemptive suffering on the cross, set to a grandly declamatory melody from 1878. It's a beautiful piece of music. And I have at the end of this presentation put in a slide with a link so you can hear a performance of it. I've here picked out for you the 3rd and the 7th verse. Sorry, and I've lost my point here, of which I offer you a very poor translation into English. You'll have to take my word for the breathtaking qualities of the original. I hope you can see it's a poetic meditation on Christ's suffering and his gift of redemption, couched in an emotionally intense vocabulary that would not at all have seemed strange to someone like Julian. I also hope you can see from the little note I've put below that this hymn has very venerable roots, dating back to the mid-13th century. What I sang unthinkingly as a child took its wellspring in a poem usually known as Membra Jesu Nostri, or The Limbs of Our Jesus, which was more than 100 years old when Julian started writing. I only realized this a few weeks ago, but I absolutely had to ask myself, is it possible that Julian knew this poem? And the answer is probably yes, not least because it circulated widely across medieval Europe. And much of it fits closely with Julian's ideas. So, for example, here's a passage from the 4th section dedicated to the wound in Christ's side. As you can see, the writer imagines hiding in that wound, just as Julian did in her 10th revelation, which we discussed when we started out some weeks ago with Emma at our first meeting. For me, what's particularly striking here is actually the meter. I can sing this to exactly the same tune that I was taught as a child. And I think that tells you how this is actually a living tradition. This is eminently singable. Now, if we look at the earliest surviving manuscript version of Membra Jesu Nostri, the poem is accompanied by an image of Christ's wound, framed by the text itself and by the instruments of the Passion. Above you can see, amongst other things, the crown of thorns, the nails, the cross, a ladder, carpenter's tool, a brutal thought, and below things like the scourges on the right and the lance on the left, which points directly to the wound. And if you, again, throw your mind back, you will recognize this as an earlier version of the left half of the image from around 1375 that Emma Pennington reproduces in her book. Now, there's more evidence than these two little points for my claim that Julian knew Membra Jesu Nostri, but I don't have time to go over these today. I can give you chapter and verse. Be a very boring historian if you want me to. But on my honour as an art historian, I think it's reasonable to conclude that she probably did. And even if she didn't, she was certainly deeply embedded in a similar devotional culture, where people like her were actively encouraged to undertake lengthy and impassioned personal meditations on Jesus's redemptive suffering on the cross. And this is my point. When I sang this as a child, I was part of that culture too, even though I didn't know it. I just thought this is what we did. I've told you all of this because I think it begins to explain why Julian's writings have this incredible power, which lies in her ability to speak to us across many centuries. In her own special way, she gives us access to the poetically rich, emotionally intensive, and profoundly personal language of medieval devotional culture. So clearly my knowledge of Julian does not just come from scholarship, because in fact that would be dry knowledge. It comes instead, or rests instead, on intense emotional and profoundly personal childhood memories. And these memories in turn are echoes of the devotional culture, a medieval culture that's actually been passed down through centuries. So that's the first point I wanted to make to you today, is that Julian's devotional culture is actually still with us if we will just pay attention to it. Now, I want to return to this issue at the end of my talk today, but now let's focus a bit more explicitly on the matter in hand, which is Julian's focus on patient suffering in her 15th revelation. I give you here one of the core passages discussed by Emma Pennington, both in her version, but also in the version that we have that's closest to Julian's original language. We don't have the original manuscript of Julian's text. We can piece together, two brilliant scholars have pieced together as much as we can of what it sounds like. And I put it in here not just as a matter of scholarly nicety, although I am obsessive and I do like to go back to original sources because that's what historians do. But I also want to show you that Julian wasn't just a kind and a devout woman, as well as a brilliant theologian. She's also a writer of the highest caliber. Her English is simultaneously trenchant, rhythmical, and poetically expressive. To convey something of this, I'm going to try to read this passage in the original, although I apologize for the fact that I cannot make this sound like Middle English. There are wonderful historians who can, who know how to make this sound like Middle English, but I can't. So you are going to get it in modern English, but with Julian's vocabulary. For oft times I beheld the woe that is here, and the weal and the blessed being that is there. And if there had been no pain in this life but the absence of our Lord, methought sometimes that it was more than I might bear. And this made me to mourn and busily to long, and also of my own wretchedness, sloth and weariness, that me like it not to live and to travail as me fell to do. As I've already suggested today, Julian's beautiful language is deeply rooted in medieval devotional traditions, but it is also her own. The way that she takes that tradition and skillfully deploys it to bring across her points is, at least for me, another reason for the enduring appeal of her work. But of course, she also appeals to us through her deep love for humanity, for her even Christian, as she calls us. I think we can safely say that we all know how it feels to be wretched, slothful, and weak, unable and unwilling to do what we know we ought to do. And that is often when we lose patience with ourselves, with fellow human beings, with our entire world. And it is sometimes a wretched world. There is no way around it. But Julian then conveys to us Christ's words of comfort, which is to remind us that there, at the end of life, there will be joy and bliss. A little suffering now will be exchanged with unimaginably ample rewards. So again, let me read to you Julian's beautiful statement, such as I'm able, where she speaks in Christ's voice. Suddenly thou shalt be taken from all thy pain, from all thy sickness, from all thy dis-ease, and from all thy woe. And thou shalt come up above, and thou shalt have me to thy meed, and thou shalt be fulfilled of joy and bliss. What should it then aggrieve thee to suffer a while, sithen it is my will and my worship? Now, this is a hard thing to understand. And as I should have said at the beginning, I can absolutely make no claims to suffer patiently myself. It is not a virtue I possess. And I was joking with Sally Ann, who was my friend not so long ago, that we were clearly given the sections of Julian to deal with that were both most suited to our inabilities, our lack of abilities, to cope with sin, and to, in Sally Ann's case, and to cope with patience in mine. The idea of sin, sorry, Sally Ann, I certainly mean to imply that you can't cope with it. So this is very hard, and I am ashamed to admit that I sometimes even pride myself on things like not suffering fools gladly. It's not a good thing to be prone to valuing impatience and pig-headedness as if it's a virtue. However, if we keep the previous statement in mind, and as Emma Pennington says, Julian's understanding of suffering, patient suffering, hinges on moments when she feels the absence of our Lord, which is more than she can bear. That's to say, when we fail to see that the divine is always with us, even and perhaps especially when we do not notice its presence, that is when we suffer the most. And that in turn leads to Julian's evocative vision of the beautiful child, the lily born from the mire. So just, if you will indulge me, let me draw your attention again to Julian's economic yet poetic English. For example, a swilge stinking mire is a far sharper and more acute statement than a swollen heaving mass of stinking mire. This swilge stinking mire is beautiful alliteration, is where we can get stuck when we lose sight of the good things of God, just as the servant gets stuck in the parable of the Lord and the servant in the 14th Revelation, which we looked at last week. But our true selves, our souls, are in fact like little children, wonderful in themselves, but in this life also in need of Christ's devoted mothering. Understanding our own littleness and our need for that mothering may then help us to grow in love and therefore also in patience. And this brings me to what I think is the most powerful part of the 15th revelation, when Julian returns yet again to the loving relationship between us and God, and the way that that feeds into our relationship with our fellow human beings. And this is the first part of what she says. And thus I understood that what man or woman willfully chooses God in this life for love, he may be seeker, that's sure or certain, that he is loved, and he here means he and she says man or woman at the beginning to make that very clear. He may be seeker that he is loved without end, with endless love that worketh in him that grace. For he will keep us this, we keep this trustly, that we be a seeker in the hope of the bliss of heaven, while we are here, as we shall be in seekerness when we are there. So what this passage does is a very clever play on this Middle English word seeker. Sure is probably the best translation, but it means both certainty and safety, as in sureness, the way one can guarantee in surety or a loan even. It has that same root. And that deft play on this word holds the promise of patient suffering to me. If we consider patient suffering as one aspect of God's love, it will tie us as human beings into such a unity, such a life of charity, that we cannot be separated from one another. Now, for me at least, that's a promise worth waiting for in patience, and if necessarily in patient suffering. So that's the second point I wanted to make today, that Julian speaks to us across the centuries, not just as persons, as individuals, but as social creatures in need of mutual love, which in turn is another gift of God's love. The two really do hang together in Julian's mind. Love for God, the engagement that a person can have with God and vice versa, but also love for humanity. We need each other as much as we need God. I'll now get to my third and final point. You'll be pleased to know I'm nearly done with my talk for today. Julian teaches us to look for the beautiful where we might least expect it, for the lily child birthed from the swilge, stinking mire. I really like that phrase, as you can tell, swilge, stinking mire. And I hope I managed to suggest that Julian's writings are in themselves a gift of great beauty. Julian knows how to match her language perfectly to her subject. She speaks in poetically sonorous terms of the highest love. Again, it matters that her words are not just full of kindness and theological sophistication. They are just beautiful. I met Julian again last night. Or rather, I encountered the devotional tradition yet again, for which he is such an ardent advocate, and which I now know that I've known since I was a child. It was at a concert, which, as you can see from the programme here, had as its fourth piece a performance combining orchestral playing, a beautiful composition by Debbie Wiseman, a still living composer, with a reading of The Selfish Giant, a short story by Oscar Wilde. Now, you may know this story. If you don't, I much recommend you read it. It's also a beautiful piece of English writing. But here is how it ends, with a small child bearing wounds on his hands and feet, horrifying, ugly wounds of nails. It makes the giant angry and vengeful, but the child calms him, saying, "These are the wounds of love." So Oscar Wilde and Debbie Wiseman are also part of the long and enduring set of connections that, to this day, links us to people like Julian of Norwich, and through her, to the rich, but in my view, profoundly underappreciated treasury of medieval devotional poetry. At the concert last night, an orchestra including over 60 children and young people, aged between 9 and 18, also formed part of that chain, as they played Wiseman's wonderful music with both passion and precision. And I can't show you them because we're not allowed to take photographs, but they were truly wonderful, inspirational. To my eyes and ears, they were all Lily children, powerful reminders that there is still hope for humanity despite it all. Patience is a hard-won virtue, but hope, growing from love for God, for all creation, is one of Julian's many lessons worth pondering patiently and at length. Thank you very much for listening. That's what I have to say about the 15th Revelation. I'll now stop sharing. See if I can get the tech to work. I hope that worked.
That worked.
And I hope you found this useful. So what happens now as normal is that we will go together into our rooms and have our discussions. And as usual, we have some questions. Now I need to get out of my presentation up here on my other screen, and I will find you those questions to think about. Oh, I can put that in the chat. I can put a link to the giant story in the chat for you as well. But that's what I'll do is I will put the questions that I propose you talk. You don't have to talk about these, but a way of starting your conversation. So just to say, you might begin again by introducing yourself and explaining to people how you met Julian, although you may now know people so much that you may not feel the need to do that anymore because several of us have been in the same room more than once. And then you might want to look at these questions and then remember what Andrea said at the beginning, that what we talk about is confidential, but we can, of course, engage with general points as we come back together. So I will now pass you over to Howard.
Well, thank you, Margit. Can I just ask one more thing of you, actually,
yeah,
that you read quite slowly each of the three questions, because when we go into
I will. I beg your pardon.
They get lost from the chat.
Yes. So my first question is, where did you last encounter Julian's words or ideas in a context which you did not expect? Where was your last moment, like mine last night, when suddenly you heard something that made you think, but Julian is here. She's here with us still. And then my second question is simply, what lessons, whether about patience or something else, did you draw from this? Can you share those lessons? And third, in what ways does Julian's vision of sin as a Maya assist you in your spiritual journey? That is one of Emma Pennington's questions, I should say, the other two myself. Oh, I can also see a beautiful cat on a screen, of which I'm always fond as a cat person myself. So those are the questions. And now I will hand over to Howard. Sorry, Howard, for missing that one out.
That's absolutely fine. So I'm going to pause the recording now.
Thank you very much, Howard, for getting us started. And welcome back, everyone. I hope you had fruitful and interesting conversations. Anyone who'd care to share anything from those conversations? Or any questions or thoughts that you might wish to pose to the group as a whole? Judith Ford, please.
I think almost, we had a really good session. It felt almost quite profound. But it doesn't feel like one you should then spill out to everybody else to some extent, perhaps. I think the coming back and this because of the nature of what we're talking about, the small groups can be quite intimate, which is why you turn recording off, obviously. And therefore the feedback feels quite strange almost. I probably do it because I've learned from other people's feedback other times, but I'm sort of not surprised that everybody goes stum for a while. Just a thought.
Yeah, that's a kind thought. And I do get that that's one of the qualities of Julian, that she speaks to us as persons, and therefore things do become personal very quickly. Shirley, you have your, if I may, Shirley Buxton, got your hand up.
Yes, when we started the group, I said to my group, I couldn't think of an occasion when Julian had cropped up, and I was surprised about it. But I was fortunate to go to the exhibition of writings of medieval women with Andrea a couple of months ago, and I did expect to meet Julian there because I knew her writings were there. But what I didn't expect was this titter of Julian, 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 Julian. There were so many people there. And when we spoke to the person on the desk, Andrea said, who was there, anybody in particular? And they said, yes, Julian of Norwich. So it was this surprise that there were so many people who were delighted to see Julian as part of that exhibition and saw it as something so important. So I just wanted to add that and share it with you.
Yes, thank you. That's a very good thought, of course, that we can also go looking for Julian actively, and people do, because she matters. She matters in a really important way, I think. Thank you very much, Shirley, for that thought. Tony, is that what I call you? Is this Tony Nanook?
TK, most people call me.
TK, sorry. You have actually said that before and I have forgotten.
That's all right. That's okay. I was just going to comment, actually, that I'm not going to say about our group. The conversation was deep, very wonderful, and very profound. So I'm not going to go any further saying that on the group. But what I did want to comment on is one of our group told me that The Friendly Giant is Oscar Wilde, which I shall get and read. And the passage that you laid in front of us, you gave us, was just so intense. I mean, we've all been hurt in different ways. Part of life is being hurt. We love, we hurt. Yeah. I've never thought of it as arriving in heaven or arriving in front of God or Jesus, and Jesus actually saying, who did this to you? Wow. That's just mind-blowing. So I'm going to see if I can get it through the library. If not, I shall bring it up online, and I shall read it properly. And it will be a good, I think, from that tidbit that you gave, I think it shall be a good book for me to for meditation purposes. So thank you.
You're most welcome. I put a link in the chat, in fact, which links you, courtesy of a university in Germany, to a PDF, because it's a short story.
Yes.
And it is very beautiful. And yes, I knew, because I know it, I had not heard the particular piece of musical setting to it, but I cried, yesterday when I listened to it, because it is, and I had to kind of sit there and think, I'm going to embarrass my young friends if I weep too openly, but and they were so beautiful. Their playing was so beautiful. There were two soloists both of whom were visibly nervous, who had to play the cello and the violin respectively, and they acquitted themselves so beautifully. And it was that sense of the child. It was not just the sense of the wounds, but the sense of the little child, who is described as too tiny to be able to climb up into a tree earlier in the story. That when and Julian has this idea of the child born from the mire, which I think is very, from the swilge, my favourite term, which we need to bring back into the English language. it's such a beautiful vision of what it is that a child is. It seems to come out of this nowhere and is beautiful. Children and young people just are wonderful young human beings, I think. And I certainly took a great deal of solace from their beautiful playing last night. So yes, please do read it. And I've also, which I forgot to show you, although I'll try to remember when our conversation's over now, I have actually a slide at the very end of the presentation that has links to, amongst other things, a performance of those two pieces of music that I mentioned.
Well, yes. Thank you so much. And thank you for this evening. Thank you.
Oh, you're very welcome. It's been a pleasure and an honour, but we're not done yet. We have got more time, but it's very kind of you. If anybody else has anything that they would like to share of any kind, Jill.
I would.
Oh, Magozata, yes, please do.
Yeah.
And then Jill.
Well, I wanted to share something that I did share in the group. I don't want to betray any confidentiality because these sessions were not recorded, but I said that Julian was my guide ever since I left my country of origin. And when I shared amongst my colleagues, academics, whatever, Julian, why Julian? They were saying, there's so many Polish saints, you don't have to, Julian is not a saint or whatever. And it was interesting because I kept going to Poland from time to time, and I was spending time in villages in the Tatra Mountains. And whilst my educated colleagues were very firmly, almost fundamentalist in their faith, talking to peasant women was much better than talking to academics. And I thought, how come I've got this group? Well, I ran a group of 4.5 years at Manchester Cathedral. It was very good. It helped people find their authenticity through patience and help their causes and difficulties. But those groups were so special, they immediately picked up when I said, but Julian is talking about God as male and female, mother and father. And they knew it. It was almost like a Jungian kind of archaic memory or something. And I just find that she led me on for many years. And I'm still with Julian after 52 years in Britain. I just wanted to share that.
That is just beautiful. Thank you very much. And I think, yes, sometimes unfiltered isn't the right thing. I had a colleague not long gone at the University of Bristol who said to me, the most spiritually content person I've ever encountered was a Spanish peasant saying his rosary.
Yeah. Absolutely agree.
This was, a very grand professor of Spanish literature. And he just said, this is actually, there is something about the quiet saying of prayers. And the rosary came in for an awful lot of stick in the thing we call the Reformation, unhelpfully. But actually the quiet, patient saying of prayers and focusing on particular motifs in your head, that's what you do when you say the rosary, can be a very productive thing.
Yeah.
And as a kind of rider to that, the poem that I started with, the hymn, my mother's favourite hymn, in the first verse, the speaker, who is the devout Christian, or the trying to be devout Christian, meditating on the crucifixion, says, I want to wind a rosary around your cross, because the rosary means a rose garland. And the idea is that the poem as a whole is the winding of a rose garland around this ugly, the cross is an ugly instrument of torture. And we need to remember that. So, but thank you for that, beautiful, because I do think actually there are so many ways of coming to Julian, and she is a wonderful guide. But let's not forget that she belongs to all of us, not just to the academics. You're quite right.
Yes.
Jill.
Yes, I'm afraid more prosaic, really. When you put links to things in the chats, I can't capture them. I'm wondering, Howard, if you could put them into an email when we get them, because I don't know how to capture links from chats without losing the whole picture of everybody and ending up off the Zoom meeting. It doesn't seem to work for me, so
okay,
it would be helpful. The music one and the Oscar Wilde and the poem and everything. Well, and everything. Thank you. Sorry, thank you.
I can turn the presentation into a PDF and send it to Howard, and he can circulate it to anyone who wants to have it. That would
be
not a
helpful.
problem by me. I don't know whether the links will be still live if I do that, but if I send it to you as it is, the file is so big that it will probably clog up the entire system. Or you can also, Howard, if that puts too much weight on you, you can just write to me directly. You can find me. My email address is, it's a public.
I've got yours, yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Just maybe try, Margit, after this session, sending it by email. If it's not too big, then that's the first
okay, I can
single
do that.
answer.
Yeah.
Lovely.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. Any further thoughts? Questions? Kate, please.
I just shared with the group that I felt it was just really, really helpful, the expression that life actually in terms of eternity is very, very short. I've just come back from Spring Harvest, which is a Christian conference, Skegness, lovely weather. And in one session, the presenter had just an orange garden rope, but all the way from one stage to off one side of the stage to the other, and then a tiny bit of white in the middle, and said, in terms of eternity, this is what our life is. Now, I don't want to, some people have terrible, terrible chronic pain, and I don't want to dismiss that. I suffer from restless leg syndrome, and it's been really bad this week, and literally from about 6 o'clock till I go to bed, because I can only take my tablets that get me to sleep. I'm only allowed to take them once a day. So I was sitting up and down in the chair trying to keep away from everybody else, and I was thinking, actually, patient's suffering, Catherine. Look at the big picture. You should be able to do this. So I just wanted to share that I found that very helpful. That was all. Yeah.
Thank you. Yes, restless legs are terrible. My mother had them, in fact, and they are, and a lot of people, yes, of course. I think sorry, I'm trying to articulate this properly. I don't think Julian ever wishes to belittle suffering. I think she totally gets that this is part of what life is, and indeed she finds it a difficult thing to cope with. But at the same time, I think there's a very strong and powerful sense that it is, as you say, Kate, in the great scheme of things, it is a little thing. And I think that's, for me, one of the kind of powerful things about recognizing this tradition. And I promise you, it's only in the last couple of weeks I've kind of realized I've got the pieces to add up all of this, is that, this is 700 years ago. We are looking at 700 years. That is also a very long time. And, my little life is, in that tradition, a very small thing. And on a timescale of eternity, it's nothing at all. And that is Julian's absolutely core point, is that it's a thing to hold on to, these different timescales, even as it can be excruciating and miserable to be human. Oh, Erica, that's a beautiful thought you put in the chat there. Yes. That is very much something to sit with, that they have the same root. Shirley again, please.
Sorry to come back. I'm going to your third question. And for me, I think the idea of the Maya being important in the Christian journey it's in our present time so important. And it helps me to be able to hold on to however awful a situation is, God is there in the middle of it, just as he's in the middle of my being. And he can, out of the worst situation, still bring something that is pure and worthy of him, that will join with him. So yes, and we're never deserted wherever we are, whatever situation. And it helps me watch the news. At the present time, there is so much in our world which is horrific and unimaginable. There's no way I can really imagine what these people are going through in war-torn countries, in where there's famine, where there's disaster, or in the life of the person who is so badly hurt and finds life so difficult. But this allows me to be there with them because God's there. I don't have to do anything. They don't have to do anything. But that's what brings Julian alive for me, I think.
Thank you, Shirley. Yes, I think that's the strength that she gives us, even as she makes us understand how complicated things are, is a very special thing. Marion.
The idea of the mire resonated with me because I love Bunyan's Pilgrim's Progress, falling into the slough of despond, and you know, to see her using that image as well was really helpful.
Yes, and I also think that Emma Pennington, of course, makes this point very beautifully, that the mire, the fact that it's a kind of unformed, messy substance, also actually refers to the creation of Adam. You know, one of the things that I, as an art historian, I'm completely fascinated by is the fact that in the Jewish and Christian tradition, as in several other religious traditions, God is a potter. He makes people out of clay. He's a sculptor. We are made of clay, you know, and we all know in the funerary, when we dust to dust, ashes to ashes, it is about the return to the soil of which we are made. And I think Julian very much thinks about that at least my reading of the lily child appearing is a God sculpting hand, you know, taking the unformed and forming something out of it. So because the child is born of the mire, and that's where I think that her metaphor of a lily is so interesting. It's like you plant something and up comes this beautiful flower from what might have looked rather messy to begin with. So it's a very resonant. It's interesting, the 15th Revelation, because it's quite short in comparison with the 14th, which is very, very long, and she thinks very hard and long about it. But she's still so interested in, I think, that shaping presence, the hand that actually shapes the clay into a child. Any further thoughts or ideas? Or observations, things that people would like to share?
Just one thing, maybe. We need to emphasize the importance of Julian meditation groups and what the groups develop in terms of dynamics, trust, and that patience through learning about themselves, their dynamics, their impact on the world. I have been very privileged to run a group for nearly 5 years, and I remember how it was when we started and what it was like after 4 years. We are all human beings capable of a lot of positive and wonderful things if we align ourselves with Christ and understanding of Christ, and if we allow Julian to speak to us. So groups are very important.
Yes, I agree. I think that's a very important thing to say. And that sense that Julian brings to us, not just love of God, but love of humanity.
Yes, that's right.
And what you are suggesting precisely is patient sitting with humanity and the
Yeah,
idea of humanity
yes.
matters.
And waiting for these incredible peak moments when life begins to make sense to us.
Yes. And they are wonderful when they happen. And
Yeah.
that's actually perhaps one of those moments when we encounter Julian without quite
Yes.
knowing it. It's when things suddenly make sense.
Yep.
Thank you. Any further thoughts that you'd like to share? We are coming up for the end, about 8 minutes left. So if there's any last minute thoughts. Rachel, you have your hand up.
The importance of suffering. As a young Christian, I never thought about this. I thought, oh, Jesus is lovely. But the importance of suffering and the shaping and molding in suffering that God allows in us, and thinking about patience. There's no point in patience unless we have hope. And hope is so important in suffering and through suffering. And we talked about Emma the pain she experiences. And pain can be a dreadful, dreadful thing, but we are somehow carried through that. And we don't know that we're carried through that pain, and we are. And I don't know how to express it really, but the suffering is important. It's part of the Christian understanding that we suffer with Christ and are enabled to travel through that, journey through that with hope and patience, and we're carried through that.
Thank you, Rachel. No, you are absolutely right, and you put it beautifully, in fact. The thing that I couldn't find time to say in my talk, but there is actually in the middle of the 15th Revelation, there is a beautiful invocation. I gave you the very last on the slide, of faith, hope, and charity, of the three great theological virtues, as all things that are rooted in suffering and in understandings of suffering. But that is what you grow in, faith, hope, and charity through suffering, in Julian's view. So I think you are absolutely right. This is important. And I think there's a tendency to think that these are kind of morbid thoughts, I guess, and that this kind of medieval spirituality comes with this morbid, not particularly cheerful side. But actually, of course, it is full of cheer and hope, as it is also full of acceptance of the frailty and the complexities of humanity, and the way that, yes, suffering can be dreadful, and you can feel trapped in it, and you can feel there is no way out. But there is a way out. That's what Julian tells us. We are not alone in it. You're absolutely right.
Never alone. Never alone. And I have the feeling that, I mean, I don't have a television, so I don't watch the news, and I'm not particularly keen to watch it. But I believe there are more people on this planet praying than there are bad people. Praying in full stadiums full of people praying, or people praying on their own, people on the streets. I'm sure they pray. Homeless people, and people in prison, I'm sure they pray. When you're suffering, you pray. There are more people on this planet praying than there are bad people. I'm sure of it.
I think that is a beautiful thought, Rachel, and I think perhaps we should. Now, Marian, you want to say something as well?
Sorry, oh, yes, I do, because you were talking, Rachel, about Emma Pennington, and I serve as a volunteer chaplain at Canterbury Cathedral, where Emma is the canon pastor and canon missioner, And Emma, I think we know, has suffered a lot herself. And she is amazing with people who come into the cathedral who are suffering. And I just wanted to share that, you know, from one's own suffering, one is able to be there for others who are also suffering.
Yeah, compassion is not something you can learn from a book.
No, this comes from her experience.
I think that is beautifully put, and I think that also is a good place for us to close with thankfulness for Emma's beautiful book and for her willingness to share her experiences and for help us understand Julian better. And with many, many warm thanks to the other speakers, as Andrea expressed earlier, but also to all of you, you know, having participated, having listened, having engaged, having shared. These are all special things. And yes, Rachel, I believe with you, the world is full of good people. And we need to remind ourselves of that in dark times. And Julian helps us with that too, as she helps us with many things. So it just remains me to say a couple of little things. This is the last in the series. There are no more meetings, but I would, particularly with Marian's warm words about Emma Pennington and well-deserved words, I would enjoin you for the next week, which is Holy Week, to read the last 2 chapters of the last Revelation, which closes with the idea of Christ in the heart, in the city in the heart, which is really worth reading. And I would also like to wish you prematurely a very happy Easter when you get there, after the intense emotion that comes through Easter week. And finally, I'd also say that we have the May Festival coming up on the 10th, 11th of May, or is it the 9th and the 10th? Let me just check it's the 9th and the 10th of May. I can pop, again, I'll pop it in the link, but it's also on the website. Sorry, pop it in the chat so you know that we're there. And we're always very happy for people to join us. There will be a wonderful Julian lecture, from which I think we should all learn a lot, by Hetta Howes, who's a lecturer at City University of London, and she's talking about, her title is Julian of Norwich Having It All. So it is about, you know, what does it mean to be an anchoress from the point of view of a fine medieval historian. So I hope some of you can make it for that. And beyond that, I think it just remains for me to say thank you very, very warmly again.